Welcome back to We On the Threat. Today we're kicking off a brand new mini-series called Surviving the Systems, a deep dive on how Black and brown people navigate systems that were never built for us. So across this series, we're going to be talking about housing, education, healthcare, and the criminal justice system. And so each episode, I'm going to break down not just the history of these systems, but also look at what they look like today, how we survive them, how we support each other, and a push for something better. And today we're starting off with something that touches every single part of our lives, which is housing. Because where you live shapes everything, your health, your education, your safety, and your access to opportunities, even how long you live. And yet, for so many of us, stable housing has always felt just out of reach. So let's talk about why that is and how we got here. All right, so housing is more than just a roof over your head. It's also stability, it's peace, and it's the difference between surviving and being able to breathe. But for many Black and brown communities, the stability has always been under attack. Even today, I see families paying over 70, 80% of their income on rent just to hold on. And the, there's a lot of, there's been a lot of studies that show that in order for people to survive, their portion of the rent should only be 30%. But that's just not the case. Where I work, a lot of family, like where I used to work, a lot of my families are low income and a lot of them pay 60, 70, 80%. And sometimes I have to combat even oh, do I pay for my rent or do I pay for food or do I pay for medicine? And that's wild. And these people have full-time jobs. Some people even have two jobs, three jobs, multiple people in their household have jobs and still can't afford to pay rent. And what's even worse is that how rent keeps rising, and rising way faster than people's paychecks. And like I said, many people are forced to make impossible choices. Do they get food? Do they pay rent? Do they pay for medical? Do they pay for gas? Do they pay for childcare? It's like all these expenses. And so, I see this struggle every single day. And people are doing everything right. They're showing up, they're working hard, they're trying to raise their family, but the system makes it feel like it's never enough. And so that's something that is deeply rooted in things. And like I said, it's not an accident, it's by design. So um let's get into the history and why some of this happened. So to understand this, we gotta know how we got here. So we have to go back to the 1930s with something called redlining. So back then, banks and federal government literally drew red lines around neighborhoods where basically Black people lived. And they labeled these areas as too risky for loans and mortgages. So if you were Black, you couldn't buy a home in a white neighborhood, and you couldn't even get a loan to fix or keep your house in a Black neighborhood. So it's like you can't go to the white, quote unquote, white neighborhoods to buy your home, which is where the nicer areas were, but you couldn't even fix your own house or keep your house in a Black neighborhood. And and that was meant for entire generations of families. They were locked out of home ownerships. And that's the main way to build generational wealth in America. And on the other hand, many white families bought houses, passed them down, built equity, turned it into college funds, businesses, financial security, all of that. And I was seeing the effects today. Schools that were formerly in red line neighborhoods are still underfunded, which we'll get into that later. Property values are still lower, and the racial gap wealth, it's not random. Like it's a direct result for these redlinings. Um, if you like, I recommend for whatever wherever you're living, go and look up redlining in your state that you live in. I guarantee there's probably a map. I know for Seattle, there's a map. Literally, there's a map, and it's so sad to see. Um, and even though redlining was outlawed, the mindset never went away. Banks are still discriminating in lending. Developers still target black neighborhoods for displacement, and policies still favor profit over people. And, you know, it's not like we didn't want homes. It's just we weren't allowed to have them. So this kind of like got me thinking because like I love doing research. Like that's one of the biggest things I love doing. And when I was seeing redlining and I was seeing these neighborhoods, I was literally looking like in Seattle, I was looking at, okay, let's see, let's see where they're at in terms of like, let's see, like, are they run down? Are they, and you could tell like where the redlining spaces are, the most of these places are not up to code, not up to date, and that's a lot of what's been going on with these redlinings and these displacements and stuff, and how we were already behind. We're behind. We were already behind. Black families oftentimes had to sell their houses so that they can push us further and further down, which I'll get to talk about gentrification and all that stuff later in the next segment. But I I think about like redlining and how like me and my wife want to buy a house now, and how we have to go through all these steps. And like, yes, it is, but it's just like the fact that like someone else like a white family they have a house passed down to them and they have equity on top of that and they have all the security. um what's even more sad is some houses deeds, if you look, and I looked in Seattle and they're trying to remove it now, but it legit says we do not sell to Negroes or cannot be bought by Negroes. And that's something that like people I think people often want to make it seem like we make these things up, but we don't make these things up. This is literally what they used to do. They did not want to sell to us. They did not want us to be successful. We had to jump through hoops and stuff to be successful. But let's fast forward to now, and we're facing something. They say it's new, but it's not really new. It's just rooted in the same old injustice, and that's gentrification. So when developers moved in, what Seattle has a big thing with developers moving in, um, coffee shop pop-ups and other things. Suddenly, like the neighborhood that had been home for many generations became the up and coming. So what does that mean? That means that was the new place for developers, coffee shops, whatever they wanted to move in and like hone their skills. So in Seattle, it's a lot of tech shop, like not tech shops. It's a lot of tech industry. It's a lot of so like I know we have Google here, we have Amazon that was here, we have Microsoft, we have a lot of places that decided to move here. And so when that happens, what happens to everything else? Rent skyrockets, property taxes go up, and people who built the culture, who made the community, can't afford to stay. Um, I could give it like an example of so we have this place called the Central District, and how the Central District will used to be predominantly black and brown people, and how much like it's now assimilated. It's not, it's still there, but it's not as much as it used to be. We have Renton, Burien, we have all these other places that used to be where black people were, and you look at it now, and it's totally different from when I was a kid. Totally different. Um, you know, the culture there is just not like it's not what it used to be. And it's because rent skyrocketed, property taxes skyrocketed. A lot of people who used to live in those used to be forced out of their houses. They used to try to buy their houses, and now, because like even schools would do, like schools would try to buy out, like force people to buy out their houses to expand their school, to the point where now there's a lawsuit in Washington, and people are getting money that if they were forced out of their house, then because of, they were forced to sell the schools or whatever, they get money for that. But most of these people aren't even alive anymore. And so I've seen it in the sense of my grandfather used to own a home in the Central District, and he was forced to sell his house. And so I always like my dad always wants me to look it up, and I'm eventually going to look it up. He gave me the address. I want to look up because I want to see what it looks like now. And then maybe I can see if my dad has photos of what it used to look like when my grandfather owned it. But that's just something I've seen. But also, like, something else I've seen firsthand is like people getting priced out of their homes. And when I say priced out, what's really sad is they lowball people. They lowball them to like we'll sell it for 100,000, but then they might make a profit of like 75, $750,000. And I know a lot of families that I used to like work with, they were forced to move miles away from their jobs, their kids' schools, and their churches. I know that was a huge thing when one of my families moved out of the building because the prices kept going up and up, and they were forced to move. They used to be like 2, 3 minutes from their job, but now in Seattle, like, with Seattle prices, they're like an hour, not prices, Seattle traffic. Now they're like an hour and a half away from their job. So you gotta think, if you have two kids and your kids have to be in school at like 7:25, so you have to get up early to drop your kids off so that they can make it to school, and then you have to make sure that you make it to work on time. And so it's like, it's cultural erasure. It is economic violence, and it's happening everywhere, especially in these black and brown neighborhoods. And something I don't like is affordable housing. And I'm sorry, affordable is not what it should, it's not what it should mean in this instance, because some families are still paying more than half their incomes just to keep a roof over their head. I found out that affordable housing means what they do is they look at what market rate is, and they're like, okay, we're gonna go just under that. And so it's different than what low income is. What low income is they look at your income and they say, okay, let's see how much your income is, and then we're gonna take a certain percentage, which is normally 30% of your income, and then like that's what we're gonna use as what we're gonna have you charge for rent. So I think a lot of people get affordable housing and low income housing confused because it sounds similar. Like affordable, it should be affordable, but it's not affordable. Like to some people, like to affordable housing, they'd be like, "Oh, market rate is 2,400, so we could charge 2,200." So it's like, okay, $200 off. Yeah, it might be a little cheaper, but it's not. And so, at my old job, I've seen eviction notices, like how eviction notices work. I've seen rent hikes create anxiety for people every single month. And it's sad because some people have to choose between, do I pay rent or do I pay for food? And when help is available, like food stamps, rent assistance, um, it's hard to find. It really is hard to find. With especially rental assistance, I tried to help so much with rental assistance, but now it's running dry, and now they have certain qualifications, and it's hard. It's hard to qualify for it. And so we end up punishing people for being poor, and we call that justice. And that's something that I don't like, and I never can understand. It's like we punish people for being poor, and we say, well, they should be able to make the rent. It's like how when you're charging this large amount for them to live under a roof, which is a right. Like it's not a luxury. It's a right to be able to live underneath a roof and be able to call a home a home. And so that's something that like it happens so much in America, and I think people undermine how much a home is to people. But even in all of this, we find ways to resist. We take care of each other when no one else would. You see it in community organizations, tenant unions, neighborhood associations that fight back against unfair rent increases and evictions. This is something that I really love. I actively fight against rent increases, especially like rent spikes and evictions. In my job now, because I'm a resident service coordinator. So in my job, I fight for residents for like I don't want to be an evicted for non-payment of rent. I try to work with them. I try to help them to payment plans. I try to help them get like on list or wait list for rental assistance because some people they actually just had a hardship. They might not be getting consistent hours at work. They might not be able to afford the rent. And so I'm like, okay, why have this eviction on the record when if evictions take a long time to get off and it kills your credit. So now you can't rent anywhere. And this is going to it's going to make you go to it's going to make you go into poverty or homelessness. So why not try to give like fight for that? And so, like, I see it so much. I see like positivity so much like families that share food. I see families even like families who don't even know people or but see the like single mothers, single fathers, be like, oh, you know what? We'll take care of your children after school. Um, I've seen that I see organizations like meeting to help neighbors stay informed, and this is what survival looks like when the system fails us. It's the community. I know my job, I used to get food pantry to come and serve food to the community. I've seen families helping out other families fill out applications for benefits. And this is what I love. I help people out with this, but I remember I was in my office and there was a family in the community room, and someone came in and was like, "Hey, so I'm not gonna get into this, but I heard that you're struggling right now, so I want to help you fill out an application. I know you don't know English that well, but I can help you." And she sat down and she helped. I've seen people give rides to the neighbors to the store, to doctor's appointments. I've seen residents come together and demand rent stability and fairness, not for themselves, but for everyone. And that's something that, like, it really impacts me. I always tell my residents to write to the Senate, the House representative, to the governor. I always tell my residents to do that. And I always tell them, like, hey, when you see that there's like events going on, or you see that like, the mayor is talking, go in, go in there and state what you want. That the Northwest Justice Project has been a huge thing for helping people in court for evictions and stuff. And I know landlords don't like them, But in my opinion, I'm like, if you ain't got nothing to hide or you ain't got nothing that you've been doing illegal, then you shouldn't have no fear. But the issue is the Northwest Justice Project, they start seeing inter inconsistencies. They start seeing a lot of discrimination. They start seeing things that the landlord is not supposed to do. So they're like, okay, well, we see this stuff. We about to get you out of this. And so, that's what gives me hope. So even when the system is designed to keep us out, we show up for each other. And that's some type of power money cannot buy. And so at the end of the day, housing is a human right. It is not a privilege. Everyone deserves a safe, stable place to call home, not just a few, or not just the lucky few. And so it's like if like I know me living in Seattle, it's sad to see homelessness. It's sad to see a lot like of people who got kicked out of their place and didn't have nowhere else to go. Like if you sit I want y'all to sit and literally talk to someone that is homeless, get to know their story. A lot of these people did not want to be homeless. A lot of them started out just as you and I had jobs, had a house, had stability. But something happened, one thing happened, and their life got changed. So if you want real change, it starts with being aware. So we need to start having conversations like this one. We need to start holding our leaders accountable. We need to start supporting rent stabilization laws and standing with those facing evictions and homelessness. So that's the biggest thing I say is y'all need to vote. Voting is important. You might be like, "Oh, my voice don't matter." It matters because you never know. You could be that one vote. You could be that 100 vote that turns everything around. So it also starts with this compassion because you never know what someone is carrying behind their front door. We can't fix everything overnight, but we can build a community, and that's something that no one could take away. So I just want to thank everyone for listening that we on a threat. This is part one of our system surviving the system series. Next time we'll dive into education and how early the system starts shaping our future. So if you connected with this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, we are not a threat. We are proof that resilience runs deep.